Hello there, and welcome to our webinar today. It's probably a good idea to start with a quick question. In your teams today, who actually owns the testing? Is it a QA engineer, if you have one, or is it developers, managers, or a mix of everyone? This is the reality for a lot of startups. It does usually work for a while, but it also creates risks. Things get missed, releases become stressful, and quality becomes harder to control. This is why today we are going to talk about how to deal with that in a practical way. I'm joined by Igor Kovalenko and Michael Tomara, who have both worked with teams in exactly these situations, either when there is no QA at all or when there is just one person covering multiple projects. We'll go through what actually works, how to prioritize testing, how to organize it without expanding your team, and what to avoid so things don't start breaking as the product grows. Okay, my name is Bruce Mason. I will be your facilitator today. Let's get started with our first question. Okay, let's set some kind of context for our people that are watching the webinar today. Perhaps, Igor, you could give us a brief introduction as to what kind of we can expect.
You mean about agenda for today?
Yeah, as I say, yeah.
Today we are going to discuss where we have cases with no defined queuing process. Who should be a quality owner in such cases? What should first do a company without QA resources or with minimum QA resources, for example, startups, and what the next steps to fix these issues. So the main goes like that.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's move on then to one of the typical testing challenges that startups might face. Michael, let's bring you in.
Okay, so I would say, first of all, one of the biggest source of QA challenges is QA being underfunded, not funded enough in startups, and it happens more often than we would like it to happen. It often happens because, for example, the work for creating a product or a prototype is mostly estimated based on what the team needs to do to develop features, to release the product or the prototype, and the QA goes as an afterthought, as, for example, as percentage from the development effort, and this percentage often tends to be underestimated. Sometimes even the role of QA is downplayed, and sometimes maybe if the developers do a really good job, it may not bring something tragic for the product, but I would say it's like a survivor's bias, because in many cases, and Igor and I have experienced such cases, because of QA being underfunded, issues may appear now and then. They may eventually compile. They may eventually pile up, and sometimes even users begin complaining before the manager or product owner or a startup owner realizes that QA process must be built properly. So it is better not to let the situation develop to such outcomes, and build a proper QA process from the start. Even if QA is underfunded, we are going to discuss how to how
We'll
this
come on to
problem
that.
can be solved.
Yeah. Okay. Any additional points that you'd like to add, Igor?
I totally
That's
agree
correct.
with Michael. So we have such a problem when we see small teams, and it's possible to help with it, as like Michael said. So I think we can go further and to discuss it.
Okay. One thing I forgot to mention at the start, apologies, everyone, is in the event that, as I say, you've got any questions as we go through, please write them in the comments, as I say, section, and we'll review all of those at the end and try and answer as many as possible. Any that we actually can't, then, as I say, we'll do that as a follow-up by when we release the video and the questions. We will answer each of the corresponding questions to ensure that they are all covered if we don't get enough time today. Okay, just to elaborate on this a little bit more, as I say, some kind of examples of kind of not good testing practices on kind of startups that have been seen before in the past. Maybe kind of doing testing in production just to kind of kick the tires to make sure that you haven't missed anything, or doing releases on kind of like a Friday evening to which then obviously you've got to support over the corresponding weekend as well. So again, these are the types of things that are not necessarily great practice, but obviously kind of potentially do happen in some startup organizations as well. Okay. Okay, let's move on to our next topic. So, what can organizations do when they have kind of a small budget? Most startups, as I say, are kind of like on a shoestring budget and wants to try and put as much as they possibly can on throughput into the product. And quality assurance can be considered sometimes as kind of like an afterthought. So, but there are certain things that organizations can do. So, Igor, maybe you could start us off this time. What can startups do when they've got kind of a small QA budget?
Okay, first of all, company small teams or startups within or without QA teams, firstly should define QA strategy, QA planning, and of course include testing phase in their software development life cycle. Because if they will not do it, and on production it could be have very painful from users, and feedbacks could be not good. And first of all, project manager or other roles on the project should define QA strategy. So understand key functionality which should be tested. And you mentioned about not a good practice. One of them is when if we talk about testing by developers, okay, it could be on the initial stage if they have QA team, anyone from team could do it, but it's not a good practice when developers test their test by themselves. So another developers could test developers code. Planning strategy, and if they have no documentation, they could start from simple checklist in Google spreadsheet, first of all, and define main checks to execute to each of iteration, and understand that key functionality could cover. For example, it could be payments, orders, because it's very critical. And if they have a small team, they could work with user feedbacks. It's like a bad review. For example, if they get negative feedbacks or suggestion, they could do with it and interpret it like a task for the next sprints. So it could be the first. If you talk about other stage, it depends on our budget, expectation, and how large their functionality and project.
Okay. Any additional points, Michael, that you'd like to add as part of this?
Yes. I would even say more about how important it is to have a strategy. In my practice, I had at least a couple of projects where, as Igor and you said, developers were testing their own code. And they were creating unit tests though, but the general testing of the entire product, after developers had tested their features, general testing was done by the product owner, and it was not very organized because sometimes the product owner didn't have enough time to test everything. Sometimes he did, but not in a regular manner. He created Google Docs with the list of his findings, the issues. Then again, these issues were fixed, and after a retest, sometimes a new document was created, and it already created a confusion because some team members could still look at the old document, etc. So even if in this case, if the startup is not going to add a QA team right now, it would be best to start at least with a strategy document to describe their practices, to understand what is going on in terms of QA, what are the gaps. The gaps may become visible in this situation, and then to plan next steps. It might be adding a QA team, or at least a part-time QA, or external QA service, or to find internal resources to close the gaps. But the gaps must be seen and understood, and this will be helped by having a strategy document.
I think that's kind of an important, let's say, point to touch on. Just because an organization is relatively small as part of a startup, that doesn't mean to say that everybody within the organization is a developer. Sometimes it can be. But as I say, the founders of the corresponding startup, they are individuals as well. And as such, they are in a position whereby they could actually add value. It's their product that they are going to be progressing through to a live environment. They can get their hands dirty and dive in and engage as part of doing some of the corresponding testing of the process to ensure that it's a level that they are comfortable with. Obviously, critical user flows, as we touched on, and payment flows are fundamental, because you don't really want people, as they paying for corresponding services, and as they something goes wrong as part of those. So identifying kind of risks as to which areas are most important and testing those slightly more thoroughly is obviously good practice. One of the things, obviously, companies can do, apologies, I almost said what I was going to say there, is they can go live with a beta version as well. And for example, some of their corresponding potential clients they're going to be working with can actually test the service and actually help out the startup to effectively find these things. There's phraseology which is fail fast, fix fast, to effectively drive that through for a better product faster for your end users. So in that context, using beta as an option is obviously a good way to look at that as well. And then when you have a more stable code base, you can promote it as an alpha release to effectively open that wider as a more stable version for paying customers. So just some additional thoughts there from my side. Guys, any additional comments you'd like to make based on some of those points? Or if not, we can obviously move on.
Also could use different practice, for example, to create risk metrics to understand what key functionality should be. For example, use different formulas, for example, impact to likelihood prioritization. So when startup start their functionality or application in general, they could think about what MVP, for example, and to to brainstorm, for example, on kickoff or grooming meeting to understand what critical areas should be covered, tested, verified before releasing. And it's a very critical thing. And more communication. I guess in startups, when there's no separated process, including testing, should be more communication to discussion about progress of each functionality to make sure that the end product should be as better as well. So,
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for additional comments there. Okay. So let's move on. What would we consider for our audience would be useful testing frameworks for small teams? Yeah. Igor, maybe you want to jump in on this one to start off.
If you talk about framework, testing
Mhm.
framework, it should be like a through. If a startup have no QA resources and have no experience, I suggest to ask someone to teach our team or teach by themselves. For example, foundation of testing, so understand each phase of software testing life cycle. So if we talk about framework, they should understand how it's going. Perhaps, as Michael said, ask external QA. It could be QA audit, for example. We do it, and use AI tools. Today, we have a lot of useful tools, including AI, and we have possibility to learn something new, what we do not understand or what we do not use, and it should be structured. If you talk about framework, it should be standardized, structured documentation, and it should be initial stage of maturity. So if a startup understand that they have no possibility to test everything because they grow and developers have no times to test, they should think first from creating framework and understand do they need to add additional resources, for example, QA resources, and after this, they could review during the period how it's going, because if you talk about framework, they should consist from a different level of maturity. For example, if we talk about startup, it could be initial. They could start with first level strategy testing, as we already mentioned, planning, and thinking about documentation of their product and test documentation.
Okay. Mikhail, anything additional from you as part of that?
Yes, I would like to add more about documentation. As Igor said, can it can have different level of maturity, so it's not usually it's not possible that it's not maybe a good idea to build a full-scale process from the start. It may be better to begin from smaller things, smaller steps, and having at least some basic QA documentation is better than nothing. It's not necessary to create full-scale test cases. Maybe start with a checklist first.
Mm-hmm.
Same with the process. For example, speaking about frameworks, as something as simple as like fully developer-driven QA approach can be implemented if the team is not ready to add dedicated QAs. So developers, as we spoke, developers testing their own code is not the greatest approach, but it's just if we let developers do it without a process, without a strategy. Developers can, and they usually do, write unit tests, but they can also automate, add some automation tests to check APIs, to check integration, not just separate features. And issues, in my experience, often come from developers checking their features independently. And for example, there is such an approach as a test pyramid that's suitable for fully developer-driven QA, when the biggest focus is on unit tests, then integration tests that also are written by developers, and UI tests are minimized. Focus is less focus is made on UI tests. It can also be automated to a certain scale, depending on the product. So in this case, if the process is planned through, it's even possible to build a K process without dedicated QAs. Still, it leaves some space for potential UI issues that go undetected at first because of less focus on UI testing. But at least it helps to deal with critical functionality first, and then once the problem is acknowledged and analyzed, next steps can be taken to deal with UI issues.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Normally, I prefer to cover off a lot of questions at the end. However, a couple of points we've already kind of touched on as part of this topic, and they're coming through as part of the comment section. So I'm just going to elaborate on, I'd say, a couple of these points now, in the event that I don't cover them to a level that you guys are happy with. Please ask to elaborate a little bit more, and we'll cover them at the end. But high level, let's talk about the developers first, because developers do not make great testers. Having worked in IT for 30 plus years, as I say, I understand that. Done development, I've done testing. I don't profess to be great at either. However, as a project manager, developers do not make great testers because they like to play and actually build things from scratch up, which from a logic-based perspective does not make them quality engineers that are focused on, as I say, something that a tester would do to ensure that it works in the way that it's supposed to. So on that premise, it is always worth getting independent individuals to actually review, as I say, the work that has been done by the developers. That can be another developer if you're short on funds, but ideally it will be better off it's not a developer. As Michael pointed out, developers can write unit tests. That covers off quite a basic functionality of the corresponding code. They can write more succinct automated tests that might look at some kind of elements of performance and integration between certain parts of the code. But that doesn't take away from the fact that it's really a good idea to have independent views outside of the development mindset to look at corresponding testing. So I'll park that particular part there. And if that doesn't cover everything that you guys are happy with, again, please ask me to elaborate on certain areas and we can cover that off. The other one I want to talk about very quickly before we move on is AI. A few points coming through on this, and I know Igor touched on it, and I was going to add a little bit on as part of this. One of the key areas where AI can most definitely help us for a corresponding startup is use it to effectively create your documentation. Using an LLM, put in a prompt that effectively turns around and says, okay, this is what I am trying to do as an organization. What do you think a test strategy should be? Get one out. Don't just take it for granted that that's actually going to give you everything you want. Obviously, read it, review it, and obviously extend it yourself so that it is pertinent for your own businesses. But as a test strategy starting position, it's definitely something out of the box that you could use without actually having to build one yourself. The other one is LLMs are also very, very good at defining test cases or test checklists for you. Again, you need to put in a defined prompt that will give you, as say, the checklists or the test cases. And again, don't take it as read that it's going to give you everything. Please, again, review that, but it's, again, saving you the time because it will give you a good percentage of what you actually physically need, and then you can obviously extend that. It saves you time, it saves you money. Use what is there as part of the LLMs, and that will obviously help you as your companies are trying to obviously extend your own testing whilst you're trying to progress that. Okay, apologies to detract away from that, but I thought it was pertinent to bring those in because they were touched on, and we're starting to see some questions on those corresponding areas. If I haven't covered off everything for you, please ask me to elaborate as an additional question. We'll cover that off at the end. Okay. On that, guys, with regards to those points, specifically in and around AI, any additional points you'd like to share for our viewers today on these particular areas? Okay.
Yes, maybe a couple of comments about other frameworks, because we mentioned test pyramid as a separate framework.
Yeah.
And as you already said, and we have also a comment about that, as I see in the section, it is a good approach to prioritize risky areas, and there is actually a risk-based framework for that, created for that purpose. So when we approach testing from the risk perspective, understandably we prioritize most important areas for big data coverage, and we deprioritize less important ones. Of course, it's preferable to have complete test coverage for everything, but if we have limited resources, we cannot do that. So first of all, if we have a product with functionality for users where they book some services and make payments for that, we must ensure that services can be booked. Users can enter the necessary data, for example, that data, the descriptions of services, select options. Options must be selectable. They must have totally working experience with every service that can be booked. And they can make payments. They can cancel if that's allowed by the policy of this application. They can refund, etc. That requires full test coverage, because a service not working is leads to customer churn, bad reputation, etc. The same about payments, and that's even more important. For example, profile settings, some social aspect, if there is any. That's a usual example of areas that may be less important for the business model of this product, and can have, in the situation where QA is underfunded, can have less test coverage. They still need test coverage, and but it can be basic, and we prioritize going to important areas first and leaving the less important areas for later if we have time. Hopefully we have time. Ideally we should have time.
I think it's worth mentioning just a couple of additional points from myself. Apologies. You need to ensure, obviously, as part of your testing as well, that you, if you've got regulatory compliance for specific industries, that is obviously covered off as part of your testing as well. For example, in healthcare, obviously you've got the HIPAA element. GDPR is another one. Disability Discrimination Act is another one. There are a variety of those. Please, obviously, as part of startups, ensure that you consider them. Yeah, that doesn't mean to say everything has to be there from day one if you want to go live, but at least consider them as a thought process for your regulatory compliance elements. And as then you can obviously liaise as you need to with regulators to ensure that you can obviously get it up to speed. Again, you can always go beta and then progress it to alpha, as I say, when you are getting closer with regards to that as well as an option. So, okay, let's move on, guys. All right, next area. Michael, I'm going to come back to you on this one. What are, as I say, pitfalls that, as I say, some startups, as I say, can kind of try and avoid? Yeah.
Well, we just discussed the risk-based approach, and risk-based approach is contrary to a maybe I would say normal desire to have everything covered 100% and everything tested 100%. These are, unfortunately, conflicting approaches, and if the QA is underfunded, we were not able to take the approach of testing 100% of features and UI. We need to prioritize, we need to understand risky areas and most important areas. As you said, in different industries, there may be additional things to consider except the basic functionality and the business model, such as compliance. Yeah, so this is it about trying to test everything. Then the documentation, it's maybe part of this pitfall. It is always good to have detailed test documentation, but if we don't have time, we need to make it basic, to make it quick, button size. Then absence of regression testing. We may test everything, run the tests. Usually such tests uncover some issues, and while the issues get fixed, sometimes more issues get introduced. So before the release, after the fixes have been confirmed, it is important to run a regression testing. It can be made basic. It can be even reduced to a smoke run, but it needs to be done because sometimes a basic thing can be broken because of fixes. Then a lack of ownership for quality. We have already mentioned that, for example, developers may have biased approach to testing their own features. Well, a QA process can be built even without dedicated QAs. It just needs to be described and agreed with stakeholders, including developers, who owns what in terms of quality. And if an agreement is made between everyone, that everyone has the ownership of some area, then it can work. But if not, then this could be a problem. Probably it could be a challenge to automate testing, to do it early. Some startups, and maybe it's become increasingly often that startups try to automate testing. It's understandable, and in some cases it works, but not always. For example, in my experience, an approach with creating at least a basic test coverage for the product first works better. It can be done, and it's maybe simpler to be done by manual case, and then automation QAs can use the test coverage to plan their automation scope.
Okay. Igor, anything additional that you would like to add?
Many things already discussed. In addition, if startup has no QA resources, I guess they defined QA methodologies that they could follow. For example, if you talk about Scrum or in general Agile, they have a different ceremony. Meetings. For example, in Scrum, we have a retrospective. It's a good summary meeting of the current sprint or several sprints, and this possibility to discuss what was not a good, what could be better, and what should be better. Yeah, what was good, of course. And it's a good meeting to discuss all phases of SDLC, including testing, and to think about documentation with acceptance criteria of any activities. For example, if they have no QA resources or have no QA documentation, it should be acceptance criteria and some grades of definition of done of ready, each of task from developers to other departments, to understand that everyone on the one boat and everything good as expected. So it's a first point is they could implement without QA resources.
That's a good point. Acceptance criteria is kind of pretty much fundamental because each of those acceptance criteria can be broken down into many, obviously tests. But the acceptance criteria, for example, do I have a payment service? That's kind of fundamental. And can I pay through these particular payment methodologies? That's kind of a fundamental acceptance criteria for a specific product. So yes, from my perspective, I completely agree with that. That, as I say, acceptance criteria is a must-have for any product to ensure that you understand what it is going to actually physically do for each of the corresponding features. Yeah. One other point that, as I say, I will say is that, I mean, we're kind of coming to this. One of the key points I would ensure that, as I say, people, as I consider as part of this corresponding webinar, as an ex-project manager, one of the things that I always learned very early on was fail to plan, as I say, plan to fail. So we've touched on some of these corresponding points already, that you don't have to do everything, but if you've at least thought about each of the corresponding elements, you can then say, oh, I considered it, I just can't afford it, and as such, this is my mitigation. This is what I'm going to do should that scenario arise. But if you at least thought about it, then you've at least covered it from your business's perspective. So it's important to consider all of those corresponding points, even if you don't actually choose to do all of them. That way, then you at least as say, covered off the bases, and you can be comfortable that what you're doing is right for your organization. Okay. Anything else from this particular topic before we move on, guys? No? Okay. All right. When is it a good time to introduce kind of like a dedicated QA team to the process? Yeah. Igor, let's come back to you on this one.
Yeah, it could be after review by stakeholders, but the main signals that the team needs QA are when, as we already mentioned, developers spend too much time for testing. Not only developers, all team, and of course they need additional resources who should perform testing and perform it professionally. Of course, one of these point when on production startup has a lot of defects and it's not minor or trivial major critical. So, and this is red signals, I guess, to transform a team and to add however one QA additional resources to make sure that everything could be tested and everything functionality could be covered as well. When a startup grow and a lot of integration, a lot of different, for example, payments and something like that, it's signal to add QA because it's too hard to test when we have, for example, only product owner or stakeholder or developers to test. And in general, when the product and project grow, the signals to think about increasing the team and to think about QA departments, perhaps start with part-time or one QA, or for example, to ask for advice from external QA team, for example, to initiate external QA audit, for example, internal QA audit, and after this external QA audit to understand what's going on, to check maturity level and to define future test strategy because of growing the project.
Okay. Michael, anything you'd like to say to elaborate on that one?
Nothing much to add from my side. I'd just like to highlight again that it is always a good idea to start building the QA process as early as possible. And again, it can even be built without adding the dedicated QAs, just as we already discussed. Some general document, test strategy, or just a general overview as a document must be created as soon as possible. Then it helps to see the gaps, and when the gaps are visible, then the startup can decide to add dedicated QAs before getting red signals such as bugs on production, customer churn, or at least bottlenecks in terms of bugs that are fixed, but nobody has time to test the fixes, or the bug reports are not detailed enough, and developers spend too much time to analyze that.
Okay. Just to expand on, let's say that a little more, as say on my side. Excuse me. From my perspective, organizations as startups can quite comfortably start off with utilizing their own resources to do some of the corresponding testings. However, as we've just heard from the guys, there does come a point where effectively you do need to consider about an independent review. One of the areas that I've actually seen quite a lot over the last year and a half within our organization is that some organizations, prior to putting their code live for a main launch, for example, if you've gone beta and you're using your customers, you want an independent review before you make it alpha. We have had a series of customers come to us to effectively say, we built this over the last 6 or so months, and we're in an environment where we've got a regulatory compliance. We would like an organization such as yours to effectively do kind of like a full test on the corresponding system, just to make sure that, as I say, all the belts and braces are there, and that everything looks good, and that we haven't missed anything fundamental there before we obviously put it live. So this is another way that organizations can use third-party organizations as an independent review of testing. They can also potentially do audits on your testing-based processes to effectively suggest that as you grow, we would suggest that you maybe move in this general direction. Yeah, maybe hire, as I say, a tester within your organization, or again, outsource it if you are have liquid cash that effectively you could utilize better for progression of your development by outsourcing it to an organization. There are a variety of ways, but as I said, just some additional thoughts from my perspective about what other organizations have done prior to, as they going live or as they move through. Okay, we've kind of come to the end of the main corresponding topics. So what are some kind of summary and key takeaways from our webinar today? So startups can maintain product quality even with limited QA resources. Prioritization is critical. To elaborate on that, most organizations break their prioritization down into high, medium, and low. And as mandatory, they like to ensure that all of the obviously highs are covered and as many of the mediums as they possibly can. Lows are usually aesthetic, and as such, don't usually have kind of a functional impact on your corresponding end users. But that's again just an additional point on the prioritization. Ideally, kind of look at using risk-based testing to ensure that you're covering off as much as you possibly can. Keeping the documentation lightweight. There is no need to, from the start, write reams and reams of documentation to ensure that it's all there. You just need enough. Again, utilize LLMs where possible and AI to kind of generate that documentation for you where possible. Utilize adopt shift left based practices where possible, and quality really must be a responsibility of everybody on a corresponding project, not just as I say an individual, because they could miss something. So if everybody is quality driven, then you're in a position whereby your organization can focus on it collectively and build a better product for your end users. So those are some key summary points to take away. Let's start, I'd say, covering off some of the questions. I think we've covered quite a lot of them as we've actually gone through, but let's just have a quick look and see what we've got. Prioritize testing. I've just kind of covered that slightly by effectively, it is a good idea to break your test cases or your checklists into high, low, medium, and low base priority, so that for each corresponding release, somebody who is a key stakeholder can kind of sanity check and turn around and say, okay, for this particular one, we could do a risk assessment as to which pieces of code have actually been changed directly or indirectly. Okay, the ones that haven't been touched at all, you can actually get away with potentially not testing, albeit that that's a stakeholder's decision. And for other corresponding ones, again, high and medium are usually the basic standards, with low being aesthetics. But again, each, as I say, stakeholder should consider what is best practice for their corresponding organization. It may be some of the mediums could be omitted if you're running, as I say, short on time. And anything that is actually found, again, someone should always be making that validation. Can we go live with this defect? Is it, as say, fundamental now, or can we do a hot fix in a day or so to ensure that, as I say, it's fixed quickly, but not going to impact our end users? You know? So from a prioritization-based perspective, I think that probably covers kind of key areas. Guys, before we move on to other points, any additional thoughts from you on prioritization? Or do you think we've covered that enough?
Totally agree with you, of course.
Yeah.
So when we think about prioritization and thinking about test coverage, we should define this priority. From my experience, I would like to add critical priority, not only high, because, for example, if they have new features, of course, it should be critical. If we talk about, for example, some non-functional characteristic, for example, usability or something like that. It's not critical. It could be high, for example. And of course, for example, if we have a time limit for testing, we should prioritize and to show to stakeholders that we covered all critical and high, and perhaps a medium, and we have, for example, only low priority, and it could be tested as we have a time.
Yeah. I mean, one point to mention, as an organization like ours, we obviously provide test sign-off reports. For a startup, you're obviously not going to do that. But what you do have to do is obviously liaise with your stakeholders that approve pushing the code to live. And as Igor just mentioned, effectively tell them, what have you found? So we found all these low priority bugs. Here they are. Yeah. Are you okay for us to put this live, or are any of them going to affect our end users? So getting buy-in on those kind of barriers. Again, you don't need to produce a huge report from that. It can just be a verbal conversation to ensure that people are effectively ticking the boxes on thought process with regards to how things should be done. To again plan that everything is being done in a logical way. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, guys. AI, we've kind of covered quite an awful lot, but again, high level. Utilize the LLMs. They are there to support you, but don't take for granted everything they're churning out is going to be a one-size-fits-all for your organization. Review them and tweak them, yeah, so that they provide you what you actually physically need for your business. No LLM is going to get everything right with regards to what you need to actually physically test, either from a strategy perspective or a test case or a checklist. It's a good starting position, but you need manual thought process to effectively fill in some of those gaps, specifically in and around areas that are kind of usability elements. LLMs don't cover those too well. Regulatory, they should get all of those with regards to that, because regulatory compliance is pretty well defined, and as such, it can define those for you quite well. So won't push any more on that on AI, unless the guys have got any additional points that they would like to mention on AI. But I think we've covered it quite a bit. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Okay. Any additional points we've got? I think we probably have actually covered all of the questions and points. So if anyone's got any additional questions, please feel free to follow up after we finish the corresponding webinar. We will put the video online along with answering all the corresponding questions that we've actually had there. And if people would like to add additional comments or questions, we can obviously follow up and provide additional insights for you guys as well. So for now, I would just like to thank our audience for listening to us today and participating. And I would very much like to thank Igor and Michael as well for their participation in the webinar. So thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Have a nice day.